Thank you for tuning back into Fireside Chats. Stay tuned as we discuss a most dreadful turn of events concerning a Playboy billionaire's death and who might be responsible for this tragedy. Joining us today, we have a man who has knowledge of the inner workings of this man's intimate circle of friends and a homicide detective. Gentlemen?
Hello, I'm Detective Jordan Huynh, and I'm investigating the death of Jay Gatsby.
Hello, my name is Ernie Betancourt. I am an avid partygoer at the famous Gatsby parties and had a personal relationship with Gatsby.
Let me give you guys some insight on what went down that fateful day. It all started with a drive back to New York. Upon reaching a hotel where the party proceeded to rent a room where they could cool off from the summer heat, a verbal dispute erupted between the two men, Thomas Buchanan and our victim, Jay Gatsby. According to reports, the dispute occurred over a woman who the two men shared their love for. Wanting to alleviate tension, the party offered to return to the Buchanan household in order to continue the discussion in a more suitable environment. However, Daisy offered to drive our Mr. Gatsby home, hoping the drive would calm her nerves from the fight. However, she lost her nerve and ran over Myrtle Wilson, a lady who ran out into the street. Enraged by the death of his wife and through a miscommunication between Thomas Buchanan and himself, George Wilson proceeded to shoot and kill both Mr. Jay Gatsby and himself at Mr. Gatsby's estate along the Long Island Sound. Mr. Huynh, why don't you start this discussion? Any thoughts on the matter?
Well, with my extensive experience as a homicide detective, I've seen many cases similar to this one. Basing my thoughts off of previous murders, I have come up with a theory. The murder of Myrtle Wilson has a connection with the murder of Jay Gatsby, as well as the death of George Wilson. Here, I have a short tape of my interview with Daisy Buchanan, a former mistress of Jay Gatsby's. So, what's your relationship with Mr. Gatsby?
Well, I would say that we were very close. We met 5 years ago, and I would say we hit it off right away.
I hear you're married now, and who's your husband?
My husband is Tom Buchanan, the well-off polo player.
Oh, okay. What happened to your relationship with Mr. Gatsby?
Well, it is very complicated, and I loved him dearly, but rich girls don't marry poor boys.
So, you and Mr. Gatsby discontinued your affair?
Yes, however, I drowned in my sorrows, and my childhood friend Jordan Baker took me out of my time of sadness. And then I met my husband, Tom Buchanan, who gave me the most absolutely gorgeous necklace that I had ever seen.
When Tom found out about your previous affair, he disliked that fact very much. Would you say he had something to do with Mr. Gatsby's murder?
Jay was the love of my life, and I also loved Tom, and I know they both loved me dearly. However, I don't think Tom has the soul of a cold-hearted killer. He may have despised Gatsby, but he loved me more.
Well, don't you think it was Tom's love for Myrtle that could be what prompted him to tell Mr. George Wilson that Jay was driving the car that killed his wife?
No. Well, yes. I'm not sure anymore.
All right. Well, that's all I need from you today.
Well, that sheds some light on the situation. And here we have a caller who has a question for Mr. Huynh.
Hi, I thought I read in the police report that it was definitely George Wilson who was responsible for Mr. Gatsby's death.
Well, through our investigation, we have found that George Wilson was the man who pulled the trigger that killed Jay Gatsby, but, we're still in the process of determining what really set him off.
Mr. Betancourt, what's your take on this?
Well, I knew Mr. Wilson personally, and it's completely out of character for him to do something like this. I heard from a friend of a friend that it was that rotten weasel Tom Buchanan who told poor George that Gatsby was the one who killed his poor wife. I even hear rumors that the poor girl was Tom's mistress. She had nothing to do with Gatsby and his personal agenda.
Although it is true that Tom Buchanan did have a mistress somewhere in the New York area, that does not necessarily mean that it was Myrtle. Tom even knew Mr. Wilson before the incident, and that was just selling a car.
I'm sorry, did you know this group personally?
No, but as a detective...
See, that's what I thought. Me, on the other hand, have been around longer than you have to know just what kind of people they are. George was a hard-working man who provided for his wife and met the daily quota, even when that bimbo was out flaunting about. And I know that rat Tom caught a glimpse or two, and that Myrtle was his mistress. If you've even heard the conversations that go on with him, he goes on and on about the rise of the colored empire, or the sun is getting colder. Like, seriously, the sun getting colder? How this man gets out of bed to the dinner table without killing himself is beyond me. Sure, he's a big old brute of a man, but I think he's sustained a few head injuries during his time playing polo. Cheating racist bastard. All I'm saying is to blame it all on just George alone could be ignorant of us to not include everyone else.
Okay, and moving this along, we have another caller who has a question for Mr. Betancourt.
I was just wondering if maybe it was Daisy who inadvertently killed Mr. Gatsby. I mean, Tom wasn't stupid. He must have known about the affair, and the idea of his wife cheating on him combined with the death of his lover must have really drove him over the edge.
You bring up a good point. I see how that could have been the instigating factor, but I truly believe that Tom is at fault here. I hate to say it, but there are many couples who are going through rough patches, and none of them go out and just kill each other.
As I mentioned before, throughout the course of our investigation, we found Daisy's fingerprints on the steering wheel of Mr. Gatsby's car. Now, according to Callis, an eyewitness who was at the scene of Mrs. Wilson's death, he saw a yellow coupe driving off the scene of the crime. Now, the investigation is still open, and we are still in the process of gathering information. But a pedestrian on the Queensboro Bridge said he saw a woman driving.
So if this is true, then wouldn't Daisy have killed Myrtle, causing Tom to snap?
Well, that's just one of the reasons why this case is still open. Here's another recording I have on a different day I interviewed Miss Buchanan. Hello again, Miss Buchanan. I know I've interviewed you once before, however I have some follow-up questions to ask you now that new evidence has come up.
Hello, Detective Quinn. I have already answered all of your questions to my full extent. I have nothing else to say.
Well, I have some new questions, ma'am. I'd appreciate it greatly if you could cooperate.
All right. One last time.
Okay, well, we have some fingerprints from Gatsby's car that include your DNA. Witnesses saw you with Jay in his car the same day Myrtle Wilson was killed. What were you doing in Mr. Gatsby's car?
Well, that day we were all going to a hotel in New York because it was too hot. I was simply riding in Jay's car while Tom drove Nick and Jordan.
Well, yes, I see, but you drove back with Jay that same day, too.
Yes.
So, on the way back from New York, were you the one driving?
No.
So you're implying that Jay is the one who drove the car that killed Mrs. Myrtle Wilson?
No.
So then what are you trying to get at?
I honestly do not remember. It was all just a blur.
Well, here's something to help you remember. Someone was driving Mr. Gatsby's car the day that Myrtle was killed, and there were only 2 people. Therefore, it had to be one of you. Unfortunately, the witness did not see who was driving, but he saw a man and a woman. Right now, I have come up with a conclusion that Jay Gatsby killed Myrtle Wilson, and this led to Tom Buchanan being torn, prompting him to convince Mr. Wilson to kill Jay, and then himself after.
I have nothing to say. Jay was the love of my life, and I know that my husband is not one to cause murder. That's all I can give you.
So it seems to me that the evidence overwhelmingly points to Tom as the person responsible for the deaths at hand.
I knew it.
As I've stated before, this is still an open investigation, and we are still collecting facts.
Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today. The facts do seem to point to Tom as the guilty party, but we'll leave it up to you to decide. The jewelry store debacle, next time on Fireside Chats.